Hello everybody. As always, we will give a minute or so to see who's going to join. I always get very nervous as if I'm going to sit here and talk to myself for however long. Hello everyone who's joining. Nice to see you all. I'll literally just give it a minute and then we'll dive on in. I'm looking forward to this one, and I feel like now that we have these monthly masterclasses, I'm like really getting into my stride. I feel very organised about this one, and I've got my structure. I have lots of notes as well, which it sounds weird, but I find notes don't always make it easy to present. I find that notes sometimes make me a little bit, not nervous, or just like a little bit more stilted, but I'm very much going to try and make it so that it's really easy to interact with, and hopefully, yeah, an interesting one. I mean, literally, I've scribbled for a long time here. But anyway, right, let's see. Should we jump on in? Okay, go on then. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another monthly masterclass, and this one is going to be all about cardiovascular health. The heart and our circulatory system and the condition of them is something that people tend to get quite worried about, just because I think that it's one of those ones that if it goes wrong, you're kind of stuffed, and also you can't really see what's going on sort of in there. So today what I'm going to do first is I'm going to run through like basic foundations of how the system works, as I think it makes things a little bit less scary and removed for you. And then I'm going to run through a couple of the more common issues or concerns related to cardiac health that I tend to get asked about, as well as bits that you might see a lot of reporting on or lots of suggestions about, and all the stuff that people then get confused about because they're like, well, which bit is true and all that kind of stuff. Interspersed with all of that information, I'm going to also give my top tips for keeping our hearts healthy, and what we would do if we found ourselves in a situation where things have gone awry, or what to do if we get told that things have gone awry but we're not entirely sure if that's correct. In terms of the products and stuff that I recommend throughout, this is obviously a masterclass in collaboration with Life, and I've put together a cardiac pack or cardio pack, and I don't know if you remember I did the Meno pack with them. Basically what I've done is I've selected 4 of my top products for cardiovascular health and well-being. We've put them together in a bundle, and if you buy them just as they are, you get 15% off. And if you also add the code NatNourish10, you then get that 4 product combination for 25% less than if you bought the products individually. So that's kind of fun and wonderful and marvelous and dandy. Right, so let's visualize this incredibly complex, biologically engineered network right down to a cellular level, or not. I'm actually going to ask you to think about a garden hose, because that's much more my style. Also, we don't need to get into the anatomy like really detailed because it doesn't really matter. To confirm before we get started, just so that people don't get confused, when you're talking about the heart and the circulation system, you talk about it as if it's your own. So like, this is the left side of my heart, this is the right side of my heart. I don't talk about it as if I'm like looking at you and you're looking back to me, and then I go, that's your left and that's your right, just because I am gonna talk about the left and the right side because they do slightly different things. It's quite important because the left side of your heart is the oxygenated side and the right side of your heart is the deoxygenated side. So you don't want to be getting these mixed up. Right, so your heart is the pump that is going to power our amazing irrigation system. It's made up of 4 chambers. So you've got the 2 small atria on the top and then the 2 ventricles underneath. And that's sort of like atria like that and ventricles kind of like these. So if you get confused, remember the ventricles are like these and they're underneath. The atria are connected but separated from the ventricles by valves, and you have And you have arteries, which are like the little muscular hoses that take oxygenated blood around the body, gradually getting smaller and becoming arterioles, and then capillaries. And then that process reverses and the capillaries get bigger again, but this time they become venules and then veins, and the veins come back to the heart with deoxygenated blood. So as a standard practice, veins would be deoxygenated and arteries would be oxygenated. When it comes to the big anatomical difference between arteries and veins, arteries are kind of like this muscular, like I say, hose, because they're going to take blood away from the heart under quite high pressure, so they have to kind of be elastic and then snap back. Whereas veins will have valves, because what they're then going to do is they're going to be working against gravity to take the blood back to the heart. So when, like I say, the arteries will kind of stretch and recoil, which is why we need the musculature about them, but then the veins will kind of use the shunt of the blood coming out of the heart the next time to kind of push the blood up, and then and that will go through, so the valve's like this within the veins, so the blood will go up, and then as it starts to try and come back down again, they kind of do this and they cut, and that prevents backflow of blood. And obviously there are issues when people get older or they kind of lose tone in things like the lower extremities, that they don't get that squeeze, which will also help through things like calf muscles to push the veins back up again. And also things like varicose veins can be inefficacies in bulging of veins. I'm not going to talk about varicose veins today just because it's not like a key thing about cardiovascular health, but can talk about it at another time. Right, yeah, so a full circuit of what it looks like when your heart pumps would be: the heart's bottom right ventricle, so the right ventricle, sends blood that's low in oxygen to the lungs. Blood travels through the pulmonary trunk, which is the main pulmonary system, and it picks up oxygen. Then the pulmonary veins carry the oxygenated blood from the lungs to the heart's left atrium. The left atrium sends the oxygenated blood into the left ventricle, and then that muscular part of the heart pumps blood out of the body through the arteries. And this is why if you look at an anatomical diagram of the heart, the left ventricle will be much thicker in terms of the muscle than the right ventricle, because the right ventricle only has to get it around the lungs, so quite a short way, whereas the left ventricle has to shoot it out, and then that has to get around the body. So if you're ever getting confused and you're looking at a diagram, the left side, like I say, is the oxygenated side, it's going around the body, it's going to have a thicker ventricle at the bottom. So as the blood moves through your body, it's going to drop off oxygen, it's going to pick up, and nutrients, and it's also going to pick up things and travel around with hormones, and then collect waste. And then the veins will carry the deoxygenated blood and carbon dioxide actually back to the heart, which then sends it to your lungs, and then your lungs get rid of carbon dioxide when you breathe out. So that is what a circuit of the heart looks like. Does anyone have any random questions now about what I've just said? Or I'm going to start kind of diving into things. I'm going to try and pause for questions, but if anyone has any kind of going along, chuck them in the box and I will answer them. Right, okay, so no one is confused just yet, which is always a good start. We've only been talking for like 7 minutes, so it'd be quite silly if I'd already got you confused. So the key things that I want to cover today to consider with heart health are the efficacy of the system overall and what might impact that. And then also kind of like subdivision, flexibility and tone of the vessels, because that's going to be slightly different. They are going to interlink, but I want to just cover those a little bit differently. So, efficacy, going well, of the system. I'm going to divide this into like different things. So the first thing I want to talk about is electrolytes. So I talk about electrolytes a lot, and people must think I'm a bit of a broken record, but they're really important. So electrolytes are minerals with an electronic charge that basically tell fluid where to go in the body and how to behave. So when you're looking at the cardiovascular system, we're talking about blood pressure mainly, as your electrolytes are going to control how much fluid is kept in the hoses and how much is allowed to transfer out into the surrounding tissues. So your veins and arteries aren't going to like leak a lot of fluid, but your capillaries are basically like 1 cell thick, and that's where you get a lot of exchange going on in the tissues. So that's why they kind of get smaller and smaller, and then you get all of the exchange happening in the capillary network. So you need to have adequate but not excessive levels of pressure within the hoses to get oxygen to the brain and the vital organs. And this is often where we have a conversation about salt. We also need to talk about stress, but first we're going to talk about salt. So sodium has been demonized forever as the maker of high blood pressure. And in certain cases, yes, intense overconsumption of sodium will raise blood pressure as you increase the concentration of sodium in circulation, and so then more fluid moves in to dilute it down, and hey presto, the pressure in the vessel goes up and you've got blood pressure. So yes, actually that's a point to make. Blood pressure is literally the pressure of your blood that is exerted on your blood vessel walls, and that's how it's measured. You know, if you sort of see like a blood pressure cuff, what's happening is you're measuring the outward pressure on your blood vessels, which is as the cuff relaxes, it tells you kind of about your heart rate and that kind of stuff. Didn't explain that very well, but I hope that makes sense. So the actual problem when it comes to electrolytes is not just about how much sodium you're consuming, it's about your ratio of electrolytes. And so simply going low salt doesn't improve the issue and actually causes quite a few problems. I actually tend to see more people now with issues related to underconsumption of salt rather than the other way around. mainly because it's kind of like the low fat headline. Everyone went low salt and then didn't really understand why they were doing it, and their blood pressure hasn't got any better. In fact, it's got worse. So what we want to do is actually ensure that we're always consuming sodium in conjunction with the other electrolytes, potassium and magnesium. So you'll get sodium chloride, which will dissociate into sodium and chloride, and you get potassium and magnesium as well. So the thing about those is they work antagonistically against sodium to manage your blood pressure. So you always need a certain amount of pressure in your blood system, otherwise you'll fall over. And low blood pressure is a very significant problem, because you'll feel dizzy, you'll faint, you'll need to put your head down, all of that kind of stuff. So you need to just make sure that they're kind of coming together. So don't fear salt, but also don't go against your doctor's advice, because if you have high blood pressure, then that needs to be addressed before you just suddenly start taking in lots more salt. But if you do have high blood pressure and you've been told to go low salt or low sodium, go and read up about magnesium and potassium for heart health too. Coming on from this, stress and blood pressure is something to be very much aware of, and it actually follows on from what I've just said about electrolytes and sodium and that kind of stuff. So when we produce stress hormones, we go into what we call sympathetic nervous system dominance, which is also called the fight or flight response, and that's our survival mechanism. And as such, what we do is we see an adjustment of our baseline bodily functions, and that goes for a lot of different things. We talk about digestion being downregulated, immune system being downregulated, but also things like our blood pressure and our heart rate jump from being your natural baseline here to being up here. Because what we want to do is we want to make sure that we are going to not die. So what happens is our body produces a flush of hormones, and that constricts our blood vessels, increasing the pressure within them, but it means that oxygen gets around the body a lot faster. So chronic stress can be a cause of hypertension. Hypertension means high blood pressure, quite easily. But there's also the issue that if your electrolyte levels are low, it can cause reactive stress-induced high blood pressure, because when someone experiences a blood pressure drop, their body will produce adrenaline to stop them from fainting. And so what they then do is they then bring their blood pressure up, and it's kind of like blood sugar regulation. If you're constantly doing this with your blood pressure, that's going to become a problem. It in itself is then a stressor. You'll then likely stop using adrenaline and more likely use cortisol. That will then stay higher, your baseline then adjusts, and all of a sudden your blood pressure, your resting heart rate and resting blood pressure are here rather than here when they started off. So yes, to summarise, stress is far more of a concern when it comes to blood pressure than salt, and we should be using salt within our food and probably supplementing with electrolytes. As a key point, because I know a lot of people are becoming more aware of filtering water, if you are filtering water, you must always replace your electrolytes, because with using something like drops, because when you take out sort of the toxins and bits and pieces like that and the chemicals and that kind of thing in your water, you also lose electrolytes. So it's really important to be adding those back in. Otherwise, you'll find that you get into functional depletion of electrolytes. So yes, there we go. Part 1. Any questions? Okay, fine. Right, so now moving on. The ability of the system to function as a whole. So following on from the stress idea, there are also additional elements that we have quite a lot of control over, that will impact our cardiovascular system's ability to work as we would want it to. So I've kind of tried to subdivide these. So burdens placed upon the heart. First one, being overweight. It's incredibly hard on the cardiovascular system, and from a purely functional perspective, you're going to be placing increased pressure on the heart to pump oxygen around a larger being. It also means that simpler tasks will require more oxygen, which will again place burden on the system because you're just having to move more. Also, over time, being significantly overweight causes thickening of the heart muscle, because you know what I was saying about a left ventricle having to push blood around the body. It's going to have to do that around a larger being, and it causes thickening. You'll also potentially get an accumulation of fat within the blood vessels, both of which further impede heart function and lead to increased risks of things like high blood pressure and the conditions associated with these. So one of the big things that we look at with stuff like obesity or just being overweight is metabolic syndrome, of which cardiac health factors are part of the cumulative diagnosis of that. Also things like the kidneys can be impacted. So we just want to watch out for that. Smoking is the next quite obvious one. any red flag symptoms of functional deficiencies there where you would look to add in electrolytes. So the easiest way to tell with somebody if their electrolyte status is below what they need it to be is if they feel dizzy quite a lot, they get quite reactive high blood pressure, but not in the sense of like sudden. It's sort of like if somebody stands up and they get that sudden rushing feeling quite a lot and they feel a bit dizzy and it takes them a while to kind of regulate, that's usually because their blood pressure is trying to account for low sodium. Also, the very clear and easy one is if somebody says they feel thirsty all the time and they're drinking plenty of water. If you're not drinking water and you feel thirsty, fine, you just need to drink more water to start off with. But if you're drinking a lot and your mouth feels dry, then that's usually because your electrolyte levels are quite low. A lot of people can also have dry eyes as a result, or they could be going to the toilet a lot. Because again, it's that idea of how fluid behaves in the body. You can be taking a lot of liquid, but if you don't know how to filter it, you don't know where to put it, then you'll just pee it out straight away. So people who are constantly peeing it can often be a sign of low electrolytes. You can do kind of like a challenge test with people if you want. Also people always say that they crave sparkling water, where they find sparkling water more refreshing because sparkling water has carbonate dissolved in it, which is it's like a charged particle. So although it's not replacing the sodium and all that kind of stuff, it will give them a sense of refreshment because there's some form of functional electric charge going on within the water that they're drinking. So yeah, you can do something very simple, like literally adding a pinch of salt and seeing if that makes it more refreshing for the person. And if it does, then you know that their electrolyte status is too low. A lot of people will also be very aware of things like magnesium status. So they're having lots of magnesium, but then they're forgetting that magnesium is actually going to be, like I say, the antagonist to sodium. So if they're then not using any salt and they're having lots of magnesium, they can then find that they feel a bit dizzy or lightheaded or fatigued and that kind of stuff. So hopefully those are a few signs and symptoms that would help. But yes, if somebody feels very dizzy all the time and there isn't another obvious cause, then I would often look at their sodium status. Right, going back to smoking, which we all probably know is quite an obvious one. It causes a buildup of plaque within blood vessels as well as actually damaging heart vessels. It contains lots of oxidative compounds, so it's going to cause damage and inflammation. It also damages the lungs, which makes it increasingly difficult for the body to oxygenate and remove carbon dioxide effectively. And it can also cause an increase in the viscosity of blood, so it makes it stickier and harder to pump. So that's then going to again put pressure on the heart because it's trying to force like sticky blood through those hoses, which we don't really want to be doing. Alcohol and caffeine are interesting ones, and exact response will depend on the individual, but when consuming these we actually see an increase of resting heart rate of about, depends on the person, but like between 3 to 8 beats per minute, and that can last for 8 to 10 hours, so that's quite a lot. So this is compounded in some people by sensitivities to those substances, which might make them experience palpitations or arrhythmias, which is like so palpitations are kind of like those intense heartbeats. Arrhythmias are changing in their heart rate, so they'll get like and it can be quite disturbing. They might also feel sick, jittery, or lightheaded. For those who don't necessarily experience those things, there is the big impact that everyone will see is on the quality of sleep. So consumption of alcohol will limit everyone to 10%, around 10% of the REM sleep that they would get if they hadn't consumed alcohol. They'll also probably not likely sleep as deeply because consumption of alcohol and of caffeine as well will raise your internal body temperature, and you have to be cold to go to sleep properly. So poor sleep is a higher waking stress hormone level. And then if we scan back to what I said above, all of those little bits start to accumulate. So I often get people who will come in and be like, I don't understand why this has happened because I have never smoked or da-da-da-da, and it's like, well, little tiny pieces accumulate over time. Right, let me have a look. Somebody asked a question. Would those be the same things to look out for in kids? Yes, absolutely. So have a look. The thing is, obviously, with a child, if you look at the dosages on things like electrolyte bottles, you don't give that to a child. You would need to titrate the dosage down to their body weight, because otherwise you're going to be giving them too much for what they need. But again, with children, you shouldn't be over-salting their food, obviously, until they get a little bit older, but they should be consuming normal things. If you do have a child that is like really fixated on salt, and you will see this often, like kids who just like go for olives, or they absolutely love stuff like smoked salmon if they get access to it. It can be to do with sodium issues, but it can also be related to the fact that if the mum was particularly stressed when she was pregnant, you then actually get this adrenal overstimulation, and you need sodium to create adrenaline. So you can actually find that kids are born with a tendency to be like more adrenally mediated, and they can be quite stressed and anxious in themselves. So then when they start producing their own adrenaline, they're running through sodium quite quickly. It's just an interesting one. There was like a not case study, there was like an old clinical trial thing into kids who used to go and actually like lick salt crystals, and they found that it was related to this like adrenal hypersensitivity from their like fetal development. So this is why in functional medicine we talk about antecedents, which is stuff that happened to you before you were even like walking around on your own. So it's important to kind of look at those things, and also thinking about maternal health when pregnant. And before you get pregnant, there's a lot that you can do to like create an environment that is going to be wonderfully supportive of your child's onward health. Interesting, eh? That is a topic for another day. Anyway, okay, back to my list. Nutritional deficiencies. So I'm going to come back to overall nutrition for heart health, but within this section on things that kind of impact the ability of the cardiovascular system to function, I want to know a couple of quick things about cardiomyopathy. So cardiomyopathy is a disease of the heart muscle that makes it harder for it to pump blood around the rest of the body. There are different types of cardiomyopathy, and most of them are related, like most commonly, to viruses that affect the heart muscle. But there are some kinds that are related to specific deficiencies in CoQ10, thiamine, carnitine, taurine, selenium, and niacin, which is vitamin B3. So if you are seeing people who've got issues with reactive blood pressure or just general heart function, you always want to check that those things are they have sufficient amounts in them before you go and look for other more kind of like insidious causes. Symptoms would include the following, but these aren't a surefire diagnosis, which is what I always want to say, because they could also be related to things like low iron status, which decreases oxygenation capacity, but wouldn't cause any structural damage to heart or blood vessels. So things like shortness of breath or trouble breathing, especially when you're exerting yourself, fatigue, swelling in the ankles, legs, abdomen, veins in the neck, dizziness, lightheadedness, fainting, or arrhythmias. But again, like I say, that can be to do with other stuff. So if somebody is experiencing those, don't immediately say that they've got some kind of terrible issue, but it's just more information for you. Okay, right, has anybody got any questions so far? God, we're doing well today. Right, so flexibility and tone of the vessels, and this is when we get to start diving into stuff that I guess we have a little bit more control over as well. So let's talk about fat and the heart, because when it comes to diet, this is probably one of the biggest bits in terms of confusion. So fat itself is not bad for your heart, but the type and quantity we consume is important, and also how these relate to our diet and lifestyle, like overall too. What we want to avoid as a standard point is too much oxidized fat entering our body, and also an excess of saturated fat to unsaturated fats, as what both of those would do would lead to a stiffening of the blood vessels, which would equal high blood pressure and potential damage to that hose pipe network. Plus also an excess of like circulating fat will raise our triglyceride levels. Now, triglycerides are a type of fat that naturally circulate in our bloodstream. We all have them. They come from the consumption of dietary fat, and also if you just have excess calories generally, they will circulate as triglycerides. Alcohol consumption also raises your triglycerides, so that's something just to be aware of. On their own, triglycerides aren't a huge problem, but seeing levels like progressively rise over time becomes a suggestive marker that other things are going on that you don't really want to be happening. So what I would look at when it comes to blood tests always is like clusters of things. So if you're starting to see like triglyceride levels rise, and then also long-term blood sugar measurements rise, and all of those kind of stuff, you're like, something about this picture is not breeding metabolic efficacy. The body isn't wonderfully happy. This is when we can start being concerned about inflammation and all that kind of stuff. So that's what we don't want to be like, you're a demon. We want to just go, right, how do you fit into the picture overall? And is my diet causing this, or am I doing something within my routine that maybe isn't supportive of long-term health? Consumption of good quality fats, however, from unoxidized sources, so things like your small oily fish, adding in cold pressed avocado, olive oil, kind of stuff to your meals, nuts, seeds, olives, all absolutely fine, and they actually are really supportive of long-term heart health. You'll see loads of studies about how it's really important to eat lots of nuts and how that's going to be amazing for your heart health, and having lots of olive oil is going to make you live forever. It's true. Having all of those unsaturated fats, so them taking up 90% of your dietary intake of fats, is fantastic. That's exactly what we want to be doing. And saturated fats are important, but we only want to be having about 10% of them, 10% of our dietary intake to be coming from them generally, and we don't want them to be coming in the form of like trans fats, so the processed foods, the heated stuff, but having really good quality butter, ghee, coconut products, having good quality grass-fed organic red meat. They're going to put good amounts of saturated fat into your body that your body will then use for things like creating fat-based hormones and all that kind of stuff, which we really needed to do. In terms of general blood vessel, would roasted nuts count as oxidized fats? Yes. Unfortunately, they would. And the thing about unsaturated fats, let's talk about this actually very quickly. So unsaturated fats versus saturated fats. When we give fats names, it relates to their chemical structure. So an unsaturated fat is wiggly, and it's unsaturated because it has some bonds that are free, which basically means it's more vulnerable to oxidation, because it's kind of like this. You've got little hands that are going, ooh, we can make friends with something. And if that's an oxygen molecule, you've very easily got an oxygenated fat going into the body. Saturated fats are like this. Saturated means their chemical structure has all of its bond sites filled. I can't remember what the word I was going to say. It's filled. So it takes a lot more to break those bonds to make them available to oxygen, which is why the long-held belief was that saturated fats are more stable under heat pressure. The very interesting thing is, when it was actually tested, avocado oil came out as being like the top in terms of stability under heat pressure. So if you are going to cook with something, then I would tend to use avocado oil, because not only is it an unsaturated fat, it's also going to be stable. I ideally try and get people not to cook with fats when they're at home, and then when they go out, then they can be a little bit freer about their choices, because then they don't have to be sort of like, oh, I need to pick very carefully, because they're only going to be taking in a little bit of oxidization in terms of their fat structures, 10 to 20% of the time, but they'll be cooking their meals themselves, hopefully 80 to 90% of the time, or that's what I'm kind of striving for. But yeah, avocado oil, or if for whatever reason you can't use avocado oil, you can't get it, then you would want to use something that's saturated, and actually using things like tallow or ghee or butter or coconut oil would be far better than using something like olive oil. Olive oil, I think, also is such a beautiful ingredient. Use it cold, get a really good quality extra virgin olive oil, and just drizzle it on stuff at the end. And that's ideally what I encourage people to do, is to actually just cook without the presence of a fat. Use broth, use a little bit of water. It's a trick that you can do, that if you do need to use a little bit of oil, then you would add a bit of water to the pan, cover it, and what then happens is obviously the liquid will keep the temperature of the pan lower. If you have really good quality cookware, something like stainless steel, if you learn how to use it properly, so with stainless steel you need to heat it quite a bit and then flick water on it, and when you see the bubbles run around, you know that you've got a non-stick surface. You can then put food in, it's not going to stick, and it doesn't need fat. But braising, poaching, steaming, sautéing, stir frying, there's lots of things about how to sort of steam fry an egg on my Instagram feed, so have a look at those. But that would be my ideal. And yes, if you start roasting nuts, back to the question, you're going to start oxidizing those unsaturated fats. Let's see if anyone else asked anything whilst I was warbling on. No. Okay. Right. What was I saying? Okay, so the main thing also to be aware of when it comes to this is your omega status, if you're thinking about heart health. So you want to make sure that you are consuming dietary omega fats, but you know what? So at some point I will just make breakfast and show you how to steam fry eggs, because it's the easiest thing and it's so delicious. But actually, yeah, in terms of quality cookware, get some ceramic coated pans if you're not comfortable using stainless steel, or use stainless steel or cast iron. Good quality cookware makes life so much easier. And if all you do is buy a frying pan that you can use with a lid, then that's all you need. I mean, it's quite simple. I probably wouldn't, if I was going to buy one thing, I'd probably go stainless steel, just because cast iron is very heavy and I have very bendy wrists, so I struggle with those. I have one that I put into the oven and it just I almost fall into the oven with it. Right, I need to go back to what I was talking about. Omega-3 status. is really difficult for a lot of people to achieve, because if we're thinking about all of the different influx of information that we get, we kind of go, right, well, we need to be eating our small oily fish. So that's our sardines, our mackerel, our anchovies, our herring, our trout, and then our salmon. But hold on, oily fish are going to be the ones that accumulate toxins in them. So what are we then going to do about mercury? And oh my goodness, we go around in a circle. How are we going to achieve our omega-3 status? And if we're plant-based, then we can only do hemp seeds or flax oil, but then flax oil is really vulnerable to oxidation, and somebody told me to keep it in the freezer. I don't know what to do. I supplement omega-3 with absolutely everyone because it's so important, and even something like a very well-considered plant-based diet is always going to have a higher influx of omega-6 because you're having things like your nuts and seeds, which will contain different forms of omega-6, and that can then inhibit omega-3 conversion. And in order to achieve a really good omega-3 status, you're going to need a supplement. So the LLO1 is a vegan form, but because it's a liposomal, it's going to be absorbed and utilized brilliantly. And I literally give it to everyone. So yeah, you can use that one. Supplemental omega-3 will also reduce triglyceride levels. So if you've had any kind of blood tests and you're going, I think my triglyceride levels are a little bit too high, or I'm just a little bit concerned about those, then omega-3 will take that down. They also decrease the risk of anything like palpitations or arrhythmias. The only time you wouldn't use an omega-3 supplementally is if somebody is on an anticoagulant, because it is going to decrease the viscosity of the blood as well. It's a blood thinner, so you don't add a pharmaceutical anticoagulant to a nutraceutical anticoagulant, otherwise you can end up with a clotting issue. So just a thing to be aware of. It can also help to slow the build-up of plaque within the blood vessels. Now, this is a point which is, before I kind of carry on talking about fats, is I just want to talk about calcium, because there is a significant push in certain instances for people to take calcium supplements, or people are told to take calcium supplements for their bones. And this is often in older people, and especially in postmenopausal women. Now, the thing about that is, in postmenopausal women, as an example, when estrogen levels drop, you have an increased risk of cardiovascular disease. And this is because estrogen is very protective of blood vessel flexibility. The thing about calcium is if it's out of whack with other nutrients, it will deposit in the blood vessels. So actually, what we look at when it comes to bone health, and I will say this a million times until people understand this, is that calcium through your diet, whether that is because you consume organic dairy or you have sesame and tahini, whether you eat edamame, whether you have green leafy vegetables, they're all perfect, but it's much better to do dietary calcium, supplemental magnesium, vitamin D and vitamin K2. That is related to long-term optimal bone health and also no increased risk for cardiovascular health and well-being. So please watch out for calcium supplementation, because we don't really need to be doing that. And actually, calcium on its own as a supplement shows no change in terms of preferential benefits to bone health. So that is a point. In terms of an omega-3, which somebody has just asked, yes, use the LLO1 from Lipolife. It's included in the cardio pack, which you can get at that wonderful 25% discount. I will put the details in the caption. And yes, this is going to be safe for the people who are saying that they need it and they have to leave, that kind of stuff. Okay, right. So summary point on that. You do need fats. They aren't bad for the heart. Don't oxidize them. Use them cold. Make sure the majority of your fats come from unsaturated sources. Avoid vegetable and sunflower oils and rapeseed as if they are the plague. Summary point closed. Right, okay, we are flying through time. So this is the bit that is probably most interesting to people. So inflammation, blood sugar and cholesterol. Cholesterol, again, another one that everyone gets confused about and really upset about, and lots of stuff is flying around. Cholesterol is actually our friend. It's just like salt. It's been demonized for doing something that doesn't actually do. And if we look at heart health figures, since the big low-fat revolution, we have had many more issues in terms of heart health than when people were eating really good quality fats. So what cholesterol does is it's like a little roaming helper. So you have the two different types. It's called a lipoprotein. So you have low density lipoprotein and high density lipoprotein. And you also have very low density lipoprotein. And these are what we shorten to HDL and LDL and VLDL. So what happens is in the liver, you have HDL. Comes out, goes around. So high density means that it's got more protein than fat in the little molecule. So as it goes around, it deposits protein and it picks up fat. And then progressively, as it's working its way back to the liver, it becomes lower density because fat is more buoyant than protein, and you get LDL. But then what should happen is it should go back to the liver, and it should either be recycled and go back around as HDL, or if it's being used, then it gets broken down and excreted as part of bile acids and in our feces and that kind of stuff. So what those little patrolling molecules will do is if they see damage within the blood vessels, they will act as patches to allow healing underneath. So you'll always get like a little nick or whatever within a blood vessel for something that's going on. So the cholesterol would go over the top, it heals underneath, and then it goes off to be resorbed and that kind of stuff. The issue is, what we see a lot now is that you get chronic inflammation and high or badly regulated blood glucose. And both of those, or oxidized fats actually, anything that's a pro-oxidant or a pro-inflammatory molecule within the blood vessels, they act like little meteors going like this around the blood vessels, causing lots of micro damage. So then what you get is recruitment of cholesterol over the top to heal it, but then you've got another little meteor that's come along, and then it's then oxidized that cholesterol on top, so you then need another patch of cholesterol to go here. But there's one on this side, and that's going to need cholesterol too. So then what you get is recruitment of cholesterol and oxidization of cholesterol within the blood vessels that then causes narrowing, and that's what atherosclerosis is. So the cholesterol isn't the issue, the cholesterol's trying to help you. The inflammatory process preceding it that recruited the cholesterol to that area is the problem. So having or asking people to have incredibly low cholesterol is really, really bad, because cholesterol is used to make all of your steroid hormones. It's also used to make things, it basically makes up the entire structure of your brain. So the other thing that we've seen a massive rise in since the jump on cholesterol and to take statins is a massive upswing in neurodegenerative diseases, because you're basically removing somebody's ability to look after their brain. I do not stand by this idea that everyone should have a cholesterol level of like 4. I think that's far too low. And again, like I say, in sort of postmenopausal women as another example, where you have that low estrogen status, cholesterol is actually going to form that protective element for your circulatory system. So the thing that, again, you need to be aware of is not just your total cholesterol level, but the balance between your HDL and your LDL. Because if they are in a nice balanced ratio, that shows that your recycling is working really well and your body's very happy. The thing that you need to look out for is your sugar consumption and your blood sugar regulation and your overall inflammatory state. Because if they're out of whack, all of a sudden, and you've got high LDL at the same point, then you have kindling and spark. That's going to be a problem. If you have a high level of cholesterol and none of this going on here, this is just going to be your nice little patrolling safety mechanism that you actually want to look after and you want to keep. I see a lot of issues with people with their cholesterol being too low. Maybe they've been on statins for a really long period of time. If you are on statins, this is something that you always need to be aware of. You have to be supplementing at least 200 milligrams of CoQ10 per day. So the LQ1 is 200 milligrams per dose. If you've been on anything higher than 20 milligrams of a statin for like 6 months, you're probably going to need to do a loading dose of CoQ10 to get yourself back up to a functional level. People will often be fatigued, have brain fog, have muscle aches and pains, because CoQ10 is vital for energy production in the cells, and a depletion of that will mean that you use it as an antioxidant rather than for energy metabolism. So if you are one of those people who's on 40 milligrams of a statin or even higher, which is criminal, you should be taking at least 2 doses of the LQ1 per day, so with different meals, or up to 3 doses. And if you are feeling that fatigue or that brain fog, then think about adding it in as well. The other one that is really important that I wanted to touch on, and this is why I included it in the cardio pack, is resveratrol. So if you've ever seen any of the things that say, drink red wine for your heart, it's because red wine and those kind of like the dark grapes will contain this antioxidant. But when it comes to cardiovascular health and well-being, it actually is preventative of damage to the blood vessels. So if you are in a situation, I mean, this is the other thing to be aware of. As we get older, naturally our body gets less efficient. So adding in additional antioxidants is only going to be a benefit for us in terms of maintaining and preserving our health long term. So jump in before there's an issue. We all know that there is like an increased risk of all-cause mortality as we get older, but it's only because of a pro-oxidant state being established within the body. So resveratrol is one that I absolutely love. I use it, again, with a lot of people. I personally use it just because I think it's incredibly important. It also has other actions, but it's a really, really, really good one in terms of maintaining health of the circulatory system overall. And the other one that I added in was phosphatidylcholine. Now, within the Life supplements anyway, you will get phosphatidylcholine because it's part of the products, but isolated, basically phosphatidylcholine is something that you would get from stuff like eggs. But it is it does a lot of different things. It basically forms a neurotransmitter called acetyl-CoA. Now, acetyl-CoA regulates contractions within the body, so things like cardiac contractions, but also intestinal peristalsis, and it also regulates gland secretions. So when we think about all of those elements and the burden that we're placing on our body generally, having a good level of phosphatidylcholine within our bodies is going to be supportive of just general regulation. So I added that one in there because it's something that Life produce that a lot of other people will not do. It also plays really important roles in things like memory function, mood stability, and that kind of stuff. So that's why I put it in there. And it reduces fat deposits. So all of this kind of stuff, it's like cleaning stuff out for you. Vitamin D is also another one that's really important for regulating things like plaque formation, but we mainly see that more in the circulatory system up in the brain. So it's still important, but I thought I wouldn't talk about vitamin D for once, but it's very important anyway for the circulation. And final point before I wrap up and get way too in depth was obviously exercise. Our heart is a muscle. Our circulatory system is this interconnected web. We need to appropriately exercise and we need to strength train that muscle. Doing lots and lots of cardio exercise doesn't necessarily make your cardiovascular system stronger. What you need to do is you need to force it to work and then allow it to recover. Because what we want is elasticity and stamina. That's what that is. So doing something like uphill interval walking is one of the best exercises that you can do to strengthen your cardiovascular system. And you do it to your own pace and your own level. It doesn't have to be anything like really hard on your joints or anything like that. So start off walking on the flat, get up to a nice steady pace. Yeah, we're going along. And then if you're on a treadmill or you're by a hill, then what you do is you engage your core and you stride uphill for a couple of minutes and then you get back to the flat again. And what you want to do is decrease the rate, I can't think of the words, basically decrease the time it takes for your heart rate to get back to its normal baseline. So what you will be doing is this. And that's exactly what we want. That is a really lovely, flexible, well-functioning cardiovascular system if you get that really quick bounce back to your baseline within a minute or so of pushing yourself. And you should feel out of breath, but at the same point you shouldn't be gasping. And this is what I mean about you doing it to your own pace, is actually just pushing the body to keep functioning at a really high level, like endurance running. That raises your stress hormone levels, and like I say, that's then going to increase your blood pressure, increase your resting heart rate, all of that kind of stuff. We don't need that. What we need is the ability for our body to go, we can push and we can come back, we can push and we can come back. If you like doing low intensity steady state exercise such as swimming, that's a really good one to do because obviously you're training your lung capacity as well. Cycling is another good one, but don't make exercise like something you beat yourself around the head with. Do it as something that you enjoy, because it's actually much more important for general long-term health, but specifically with the heart, to do stuff regularly, to take exercise breaks, to go out for a walk during the day, to try and just keep the body moving. And again, from that perspective of supporting venous return to the heart, you will use some of the contraction from things like your calves and your feet and your ankles to help push the blood back up again. So a lot of people who get a little bit older, like I said, they start to lose muscle tone or they sit for a long period of time, that's why they start to get numbness in their feet, or they'll get that dusky colour, and it's because they're not getting the oxygen, they're not getting the exchange of the oxygenated and the deoxygenated blood because they're not moving enough. Right, 45 minutes of me wittering on once again. I hope you enjoyed this. Yeah, any questions? I will have a look and see if there are any. So if you knew your blood sugar was out of whack, would resveratrol be a good add-in? Yes, because if you know that you're in a situation where there could be blood sugar dysregulation or any kind of pro-inflammatory state within the cardiovascular system, adding in those extra antioxidants is going to be protective against there being any pro-inflammatory damage. There are other interventions as well when it comes to things like cholesterol management. So you can use things like red rice yeast, which would act as like a natural statin. You can also use things like stuff that supports bile acid production because it's going to be helpful to drawing cholesterol out of the body. Phytosterols are going to be useful in terms of balancing how much cholesterol is absorbed from the diet, but you actually make 90% of your cholesterol in your cells because it's so important. You only take up 10% from your diet, and it's only the people who have familial hypercholesterolemia, so an issue with that enzyme regulation of uptake versus not needing to uptake from their diet, that would actually need to think about blocking their cholesterol receptors. Cholesterol is such a misunderstood one. Again, do not fear cholesterol. Eat eggs. They are very good for you. Don't eat huge quantities of very, very fatty red meat every single day, but also don't think that you have to exclude it because it's going to be bad for your heart. I would much prefer that somebody sat down and had something like, I don't know, grass-fed beef with lots of green vegetables and a little bit of potato than sat and had a bowl of pasta with a tomato sauce, because the beef meal is going to be much more regulating for their body. It's going to be far more nutrient dense. It's not going to spike their blood sugar, whereas the other one would be far more pro-inflammatory because it doesn't have the protein, it doesn't have the fat. And we've been led to believe that kind of having those higher grain diets is going to be better. I mean, grains are important because they're good for fibre, but at the same point, don't fear the red meat. Thinking about your heart health. Right, okay, here we go. Thank you so much. Someone close to me, long COVID, and now gone to the cardiologist. Thanks very much. There's a lot of very interesting stuff when it comes to COVID and how it affects the body. There's a link between blood pressure, the kidneys, and COVID, because there's a link between how COVID impacts your angiotensin system. So there's, again, very long-winded story, but people can find that they have issues with regulating blood pressure, or it can be like a viral issue. But do check as well, because long COVID is very much associated with antioxidant depletion and mitochondrial dysfunction. So have a look and see if that's actually that they need to look about those things a little bit more. The CoQ10, niacin, selenium, thiamine situation, and just see maybe if that's actually what's going on. Also histamine. What's your opinion on eating 2 boiled eggs every single day? I eat 2 eggs most days. Really, really nutrient dense. The only thing that eggs don't contain is vitamin C. They have pretty much everything else in there. They're a really good satiating source of protein. They wouldn't be your complete protein for an entire meal, but I have absolutely no problem. If they're really good quality eggs, again, you just need to make sure that if you're eating sort of like cage farmed eggs, then they're not going to be giving you all the nutrients that you want, and they can be more pro-inflammatory. But if you're buying lovely organic eggs, then they're a fantastic thing to be adding in, and I would be thrilled if I saw more people eating more eggs. Okay, let's have a look. What would a good cholesterol ratio be? So this is the thing again, people would ideally love to see like a 1-to-1 ratio of LDL to HDL. It takes a lot to get to that point, but I would be quite happy with anything sort of around there. I'm quite content with people having, if they're exercising well, they're looking after themselves and they're eating a good quality diet, I will go up to a cholesterol level of like around 6-ish, maybe a little bit higher, depending on the person. And if they've then got like a good level of HDL and a kind of similar level of LDL, then I'm absolutely fine with that. The thing I would then obviously tally with that is I would look at their HbA1c, which is their long-term average of blood sugar regulation. So it's a marker of blood sugar regulation on red blood cells. So you want to make sure that that is absolutely nowhere near the pre-diabetic bracket. You want it in the 30s. And that would then be a very happy system that I would be wonderfully content with. Okay. Do you think low sodium could have any link to Raynaud's? Raynaud's is an autoimmune condition, so it's slightly different. It is to do with vasodilation, vasoconstriction, so opening and closing of the blood vessels. But no, it's not usually to do with electrolyte status. It's usually to do with something else. If somebody was getting issues with numbness and tingling, then I might think about sodium, but then I also might think about B12. But Raynaud's usually comes as like a cluster with other autoimmune style presentations. Anyone has any other questions, please ask them. If not, I will wrap this up. Wish you a wonderful evening, day, wherever you are, and save this and share it. Okay, we're wrapping up. So I will look forward to seeing you guys all next month for the next masterclass. And anybody who's watching back who has a question, whack it in the comments and I will answer it for you there. Goodbye for now.